Good evening, good morning, whenever you tune in. This is Preston Smith with the Three Things for the Corners magazine. I'm the editor of the Corners. I'm also your detective, I hope, in Central Europe. And we are coming straight from MRP Studios in the Praga district of Warsaw, Poland. And I got to say, pretty cool studios. They're getting cooler all the time. So if you're in the city and you want to do some telemarketing or YouTube marketing, whatever, you come on down. That's my plug, so Craig Smith can be happy. We're going to talk about a few things, and at the start of this, you just saw some photos. So before I get into the three things we're going to talk about, I want to tell you what those are. Those are some photos straight out of Ukraine, taken by a Texas-born photographer, Patrick Patterson. And if you check out the magazine, which is www.thecorners.pl, and there's the vlog, you can hit that site, hit the Patreon button, and you don't have to pay for this one. It's up there for free for right now. And you can check out his point of view of his time in Ukraine. He was there for quite a long time, took photos. And I tell you, one of the reasons why I interviewed him, just to get this off my chest before we even start. One of the reasons why I interviewed him is because, you know, Ukrainians are undergoing just a terrible time. They're getting bombed. They're getting hit by drones. Their men are going off to the front. Their children are being deported. And when you talk to people who are directly victims, sometimes they're dealing with so much, they're so overwhelmed, and they'll tell you, yeah, this happened, that happened, but you don't always see the detail, or you don't always hear the detail that you hear from an outsider that is actually there at the time and watching their reactions and dealing with his own stress and fears. So I did a question and answer interview. Check it out, read it, and check out the photos. And this is the first part of 3 parts that we will be running over the next few weeks. And then in the magazine, I'm going to feature some photos. Actually, I found the interview and the insights, you know, rather astounding, actually. Now, I was told again and again, I got to say it, like and subscribe, and thank you so much for you subscribers already. I see we have a lot of Ukrainians subscribing to the site. We're at like 280 or something like that, or 300 already in a few days. Man, I'm actually popular. I can't believe it. But I really do appreciate it. And before we get into the 3 things, I got to say one thing. Terrence Crawford, P4 Pete. I don't, if you saw the boxing match, oh my gosh, go watch. I know it has nothing to do with this region, but you know who does has something to do with this region, and that is Alexander Usyk, who also many are going to argue, including our Ukrainian subscribers, that he is the top pound-for-pound boxer in boxing, in professional boxing. And you know what? He's going to be fighting on August 26th, coming up here in Poland against Daniel Dubois. And man, I can't wait. I can't wait. And there's one thing I'm going to throw in there, that there's a great interview. It was in Polish. I'll still put a link to it. A great story that was actually on Onet. And they interviewed him, and he said something that I'm going to translate into English. But he said this, and I really liked it. He said he's training. He's going to have this fight in Poland. He said, and I see this as something wonderful. And then he refers to the war. One neighbor wants to grab everything for himself, and the other is helping us. And this relationship is what friendship is. Man, makes me proud to be in Poland, to tell you the truth. It really does. Now, let's talk about the 3 things for this week. I know that in some of you that have written me directly, that know me, that you're like, yeah, Ukrainian war update. For sure, yes, one of the 3 things is going to be a Ukrainian war update. You're going to have to wait for that. That's not going to be the first thing. That's going to be the second thing. The first thing this week is actually going to touch on the Albanian Mafia and cocaine and drugs. And I wrote in the magazine, in the corners, and I should have brought a hard copy in there. Can you believe I didn't bring, Evgeny, I didn't bring a hard copy to show. If you want a hard copy, you can get a hard copy from me. I'll have to show it the next show, I guess. Maybe I'll show it in the next segment. At the start of the second thing, I'll show it, because we'll have a secret, break, and we'll cheat, and there'll be special effects. But you notice, this isn't, no teleprompter, right? Right, Evgeny? No teleprompter. This is all in my head. All these little voices in my head, kind of scary. But if we talk about the second thing, the Ukrainian war update, the first thing is the Albanian Mafia And you know, honestly, Albania's got to get control of this. It's hurting Albania reputationally. I mean, you know, not like it hasn't in the past, but it really is right now. And we'll talk about why. And the last thing is actually going to be kind of a detective segment. I'm a licensed detective in Warsaw, and I'm going to get into, yes, matrimonial cases, child custody fights, and actually this still goes back to Ukraine. So let's dive into the first thing. Okay, the first thing, but look, pop, it's like magic. The corners, the hard copy magazine. I know you wants it, you needs it. If you want one, you know what you can do? You can sign up for Patreon. And if I see you sign up for Patreon and you send me a message, there's different, you can find how to get in touch with me on the website, whatever. Man, I might even just send you a magazine if you become a subscriber. Otherwise, if you're in Warsaw, yeah, you can buy one from me. If I think you're cool and you're my friend, I might give you one. I'm not saying if I don't give you one, you're not cool, but whatever. But one thing, if we're talking about the first thing, which is the Albanian Mafia, some of you who have already read this, and if you get on the website, www.thecorners.pl, you can, if you hit the title, the mob, on it, on the left side, it'll open up and you can flip through it. And for now, you can still download it like a PDF. I've still left that up there. And you'll notice that the cover story in the mag was on Murder, the Mob, and Cocaine. Now, I focused in that story actually mostly on a super cartel, which had to do with the Macro Mob, the Kinahan Mob, Camorra, and Tito Indino, right? The Tito Indino Mob, because these guys were all kind of lumped together as a super cartel by the U.S. that was really active from, give or take, 2014, 2015 to 2020, 2021. People started getting busted. Unfortunately, at the tail end of that mafia's reign, just a fantastic journalist, Dutch journalist, Peter de Vries, was murdered, and this is linked to the mafia. And so I mostly focused on that in the story, and also mentioned the Kavac and Scaljari, Montenegro gang war that, you know, there's like 50 of those guys that killed each other, and then the super cartel, they had gang wars and they were killing each other, and then there was journalists, and take a look at it. But there is a mafia that I did not really include in this story. And some of you that are really into true crime and criminology and all that in Europe, you might say, well, why did you leave out the Albanian mafia? Well, to tell you the truth, the story's really long. You can't include everything, but it is extremely, extremely important. And what am I talking about when I say the Albanian mafia and cocaine trafficking to Europe? Well, I'm talking about Kompania Bella. Now, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the Albanian mafia and why I'm picking on them, and why I'm going to give you this background to tell you really why I'm picking on the Albanian mafia and Albania. My first experience, to tell you the truth, with the Albanian mafia, I had a couple, okay? The first time, I was actually, when I first arrived to Central Europe, I got a job. I guess it's just a crazy job. I ended up running a large travel agency, and we had all these hotels in the Czech Republic, Slovakia. We even had them in Petersburg. Man, there's other mafia stories about Petersburg. But at the time, the Albanian mafia was starting to make inroads, and we started hearing things from our tourists. Now, every once in a while, we sent tourists to other places, like to Germany, and the Albanian mafia started hitting Germany. And already, even back then, this was the very early 90s, you started hearing stories that kind of like didn't fit in. For example, the Russian mafia was already here. They're actually active in the hotels, to tell you the truth, in Czech Republic. You heard about the Serbian mafias. You heard about you know, the mafias that were trafficking in women, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the first stories you heard is the Albanian mafia was a little different. It was a little bit more violent. For example, when the Russian mafia decided they wanted to force a restaurant to pay, or the Polish mafia, for example, they would show up, scare the people, threaten to hit them, do whatever, that you're going to get it if you don't start paying for your roof. And a lot of restaurants paid, as did discotheques. But then the Albanian mafia was showing up, and they would do things like this happened in Germany. They showed up, a guy walked up to just somebody who was eating a sandwich in an outdoor cafe and hit him in the head with an axe. And then they said, if you don't want more of that, you better start paying. And then there's another one, the same type of thing, just randomly hit a guy with the baseball bat. It was like violence before the threat, and it's pretty convincing that the threat is real. This was, we're talking 20, 25, man, maybe it's a long time ago when this stuff started surfacing, and it became very, very evident that the Albanian Mafia groups were very violent, very hard to infiltrate. If you talk to anyone from law enforcement, they'd say you can't infiltrate them very well because they're clan-based, etc. It's not like you can fake your way in very well. There's not a lot of different nationalities. They tend to rely on each other, etc. So they immediately posed a large problem. And over the years, you would hear more and more issues like these. I'm not going to get into my other experience with the Albanian Mafia. There were, people would also lump the different mafias in with the KLA with the Albanian Mafia, and it became a very complicated scenario. Well, as time has moved on, we have seen coming to Europe, and this, again, I featured this in the corners in the magazine, this just inundation, this flood of cocaine to Europe, a lot of it coming through Antwerp, Rotterdam, that part of Western Europe, but also a ton coming to Poland, a ton coming to my region, and then being sent in other directions. Now, a lot of this, for a time, it was blamed, or the people seem to think, okay, look, a lot of it's going to be Tito and Dino controlling the Balkans, but working with the Kinahan gangs or the Makro Mafia, etc. But there was a time prior to this when the Albanian Mafia was very, very strong. And it was under the control of a guy named Dritan. I'm just going to call him Dritan R. I could use his last name because he's been convicted of things. But we're just going to leave it Dritan R. Now, this guy was just walking trouble. His history is really something kind of amazing. When you take a look at, actually, a lot of these mafia guys, I have to admit it, maybe it's a little bit perverse, but when I see some of the mafia legends, the European ones, the Russian ones, the Albanian ones, the Serbian ones, the things they pull off, they're not afraid to do, and their prison escapes, I gotta admit, I find it morbidly fascinating. Well, let's talk about Dritan R. He was arrested for doing all kinds of horrible things in Albania, and he was in an Albanian police station. In 2006, what he did is he somehow walked out of one room, told the guards, hey, they're done with me, and they said, okay, and he left, and he escaped. Then he got caught again. He was in a Belgian prison, or actually Italian and Belgian prisons. Then he managed to escape from those or get out of those somehow. I'm actually not really clear what he did in 2011. I got to admit it. But then he was, in the meantime, he was convicted of drug trafficking, armed robbery, murder, bank robbery. He hit banks in Spain. He wasn't just limiting these activities to one side of Europe or another. Then he winds up going to Ecuador, and that's where he starts really making inroads because he needed, the suppliers. He needed to get the cocaine and to shoot it to Europe, and he gets busted. He gets sentenced to 13 years in prison in Ecuador for cocaine trafficking, right? Now, in Ecuador, they decided that this guy, he's actually, he's almost a model prisoner. They said, hey, man, he's on good behavior. So they actually put one of those tracker, ankle bracelets on him, said that he didn't have to live in the prison anymore. They could monitor him. He could live off site. I don't know if they didn't look at his resume. Well, he disappeared, right? But even before he disappeared, he was basically functioning as the boss of Kompania Bella, allegedly, and pumping this cocaine into Europe. Now, again, as I pointed out, there was, when it comes to Tito and Dino, and when it comes to the Makro Mafia and the super cartel, there are different arguments when it came to a trade that might be 30 billion euros a year or even more. Sometimes they said half of that trade was controlled by them, sometimes 2/3 of the trade. It really depends on, it's hard to gauge it, how much was really controlled by them, but it's clear there was a chunk that was controlled by the Albanian Mafia, which is actually kind of an agglomeration of 10 to 15, maybe to 18 different groups of clans. And now it seems to have been picking back up again. But what I wanted to point out is that in 2020, surprise, surprise, bop, he disappeared. In Ecuador, they don't know where he went. I guess he took off his ankle bracelet. They couldn't track him anymore. Like I said, would a guy like that do that? Well, yeah, I guess he would. Now, the interesting thing is if you read to the end, spoiler alert, if you read to the end of the cocaine story, you will see that these kinds of things happen. I mean, they just lost him. But this is not unlike what happened in 2022 when they'd thrown a bunch of the super cartel guys into prison, and there's a whole list in the magazine. I'm not going to go over all those, but guys who were hitmen, guys who were trucking in tons of cocaine, guys who were organizers, whatever. But one of the key guys is Tito of Tito and Dino, Tito G, right? They had Tito G busted sitting in Dubai, right? And the Dutch prosecutors were doing their best to extradite him. They're working very hard. And then suddenly what happens, 2022, he walks and he's gone. And you're just like, God, man, it's so hard to bust these guys and put them in prison and then you let them go. How does this freaking happen? Well, you kind of, you know, money talks, bad guys walk. What do you say? But why am I really focusing on the Albanian mafia right now? Well, the reason is because it's growing, and proof of it that it's growing, and it's not just kind of this even a European or a Central European or a Balkan type problem, is something that went off in Australia. Now, this really hit the headlines last week. I also put in links there, but in Australia, for the last couple of years, there has been a lot of press that the Albanian mafia groups are using the immigration system, filtering in there, and also to run cocaine. And something happened which became a bit of a mystery. There was a guy named Troy Kellett, 43 years old. He ran a trucking company, a transport company, and he kind of had it made. Sold his company for 10 million Aussie dollars. Young guy, got a family. You can see the pictures like in the Daily Mail, but they're also in the Sydney Morning Herald, all these other magazines. And then he mysteriously, for some reason, after he sold the company, he was down in the yard where all the containers are, and he fell off a container and died. And the police made a couple of busts, and yeah, they're pretty sure there were links to the Albanian mafia. It's still, at the time that I'm making this, it's still a huge mystery in the sense that they don't know, why did he even go there? He already sold the company, but then again, did someone make him sell the company? There are some who believe that maybe he was hiding among the containers. There are others that were there that are thinking he was forced to help to transport cocaine, and he went there to retrieve cocaine for the mafia even after. There are a lot of theories. Like I said, at the time that I'm making this video, there are no answers yet, but this has stirred up a huge amount of headlines, which have been repeated in the UK, which brings us back. You know, Albania is going to have to get on top of this problem because it's damaging. You know, I've met plenty of great Albanians, and it's got a lot of beautiful country, and there's a lot of great things to say about it, but the mafia and the cocaine trafficking is getting out of control, which brings us to the UK. Now, as we know, Brexit, the UK, the Daily Mail, the headlines, man, they just go off. In fact, I'm going to put a little, you can see it, a picture. This is just a screenshot. If you just typed in on Google Albanian Mafia UK, you just get endless images of headlines and stories. And to tell you the truth, they're not all without merit at all. I mean, a lot of them are with merit. Again, you had a situation where immigrants taking advantage of the immigration system. But you know what? Immigrants taking advantage of the immigration system is one thing. It's when you get the mafia groups coming in and taking advantage of it, that's when you have a problem. And that's when you kind of got to expect the source country to act. And I don't want to come across as looking like, you know, some of the guys who are so hardcore anti-immigration and, you know, the guys who are, I actually don't think Brexit was a great idea, but you can bash on me for that. I don't live there. I'm not from there. I don't pretend to understand UK politics. However, I will say that when you go a little bit deeper, and I'll give you one last example before we move on to the second thing. You go a little bit deeper, and when you take a look at what I would call a source country that sort of lost control of its mafia problem, and its mafia is being exported, you know who you find out that suffers. And I've seen this personally, right? I've seen this with Poles, right? There's a Pole that hopefully I'm going to get on to one of my programs, Slavik S. I'm not going to say his last name because he hasn't agreed yet because I haven't asked him, but I'm hoping he agrees. He was a guy that he was in a lot of trouble here. He was pardoned. I remember he went to Iceland, I believe it was, and the first thing that happened there is the Polish mafia guys that had fled Poland, that were hanging out there, went after him in Iceland. Why? Because a lot of times what mafia groups do, organized crime groups do, is they hit their own people. This is the same story in New York, the history of the five families, going after, saying, hey, we're policing our neighborhood, but still forcing Italians in the neighborhood to pay. Or the same thing with these Albanians. And there's another story that caught my eye, and it was talking about how the immigrants that get to the UK, the Albanians, whether legal or illegal, they get preyed upon. And there was a story of a young kid, 16 years old. He went there, he couldn't find his sister. He went to an older Albanian guy to help his sister. Next thing he knows, he's forced into work on a cannabis farm. There's these types of things happen. And I'll tell you one last story to end this part of the segment. One last story. And that is how obscene it can be. Everything from a Russian mafia running Russian women to sending to, say, Germany or to another country. Or, they prey on their own people, right? There's nothing really, I don't want anyone to think, because I do find it a little fascinating to think that I'm trying to glorify these guys. But I'll give you an example, which is kind of funny, and then it wasn't. Years ago, I was in St. Petersburg. And this was years ago. This was like 1992, maybe, or 93, I guess. And I was there, and it was in the middle of winter. It was like it's crazy, -30. I remember my camera I tried to take a photo, and it would, because it was so cold, it wouldn't hardly take a photo. And we were cutting through the metro underground, and there were all these like little mafia groups. Like you had in different nationalities. Like you had like the Vietnamese that were there selling like radios and T-shirts and stuff. And then you had like I guess probably a Russian pimp with some Russian. There was lots of prostitutes back then at the time throughout the whole region. And then you had the Babcha mafia, like the babushka mafia, like the babcha's Polish babushka, like the little old lady grandma mafia. And I was like, what is that? And there was these little old ladies, and they were sitting there together, and each one was holding a Coca-Cola. I was like, what are they doing? They go, well, they're selling Coca-Colas. I mean, it's minus, like, I don't even know how this is terrible. I mean, they're that poor. And the guy that I was with, he was kind of like my guide, because in the last show I told you at the time I couldn't speak enough Russian to get around by myself, really, without getting myself in trouble, right? He said, no, don't go over there. They're dangerous. And I was like, oh, come on, man. There's a bunch of grandmas. They're not dangerous. No, don't go over there. Now, look, I'm going to buy myself a Coca-Cola, because out of pity, right? So I walk over there to one of the babchas, right? And I kind of in mixed Czech, because I spoke Czech at the time, and mixed Czech Russian, I said, "Koliko to stojí?" So how much does it cost? And the Russian grandma, she goes, $10. $10. No, I mean $10. No, I'm not buying a Coke for $10. And then I turn, and there's a Chechenian here, Chechenian there, Chechenian there. So I bought a Coca-Cola for $10, and it was frozen solid. I can't believe the bottle wasn't cracked. And the lady spasiba, she was really nice. She gave me the Coca-Cola. These guys let me go. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, that's just, and then you know what? It seemed kind of funny. Okay, it's $10, I can live without it. But then the guy I was with, he said, you know that babcha, she's not Russian. Like, if she's not Russian, she's Chechenian. What do you mean so they're having their own grandma do that? He goes, yeah, that's how organized crime works. And to tell you the truth, that was one of my first introductions to how it worked. And you see it just across the board. But enough of that. Let's get into the second thing, which, yes, I know some of you have waited for it, Ukrainian war update. Now for the second thing, the Ukrainian war update. You know what, before I get into the update, there's one other thing that I didn't mention in the first thing. And that's, I've been asked about this, which is why I wanted to address it. There's the Interpol red notices, and then there's the Europol most wanted. And people said, well, man, I've heard that, can you get rewards? And those guys are on the site, and everybody gets busted, and it's easy to find them. Okay, very quickly, just to address that before we get into the Ukrainian war update. If you hit on, say, the Interpol red notice update, and you hit on that, you'll see, man, it's not so simple unless you just are a genius and can recognize faces. I mean, I think I hit on it yesterday, and I can't remember, but I think it was like 6,091 guys 6,991 guys that were listed on there, and you flash through them, and they're all different races, and I'm not saying they're all Albanian. If you hit on the Europol most wanted, there are less, and maybe in the pictures are maybe a little bit bigger. Here's a couple samples you can see on that side, or that's wherever we put the picture. But the flip side of this is a lot of those guys are really, really dangerous. There are rewards, but if you're thinking about becoming, I don't know, a bounty hunter in Europe and going after these people, good luck to that. I'm not encouraging that. Now, let's talk about the Ukrainian war update. Okay, guys, a lot is happening. Now, if you watched last week's video, last week's YouTube upload, you saw me hinting that we need to watch this week. I didn't have inside information. I wasn't giving anything away. But I was suggesting that when the real counteroffensive starts, we are going to see it. Well, tell you the truth, now we see it. Things are changing fast. A lot has been happening. I'm going to go through some of the main hot points, but I am going to say, just starting off, that even by the time that you see this, by the time this is recorded and we do the uploading and we put the little photos in and we fix whatever I mess up when I'm, all the stuff that I shouldn't tell you that we do, things could change. The other thing is, no matter where you look, whether you're looking at, say, the US sites or the blogger sites or the Russian sites or the Ukrainian sites or the so-called geolocation sites, a lot of times there is a delay. There's a delay because a lot of that stuff actually, it's not coming from, it's not like the geolocation guys like put secret trackers on soldiers. That stuff is released. And it's released you have to take everything with a grain of salt because, as I said in the last video, both sides do have a propaganda war to fight. I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying this is a reality. So some of this stuff may seem, as soon as I say it, even by the time this is out, things could change. But on the upside, there were some very sharp, pronged attacks. I'm going to be clear here. I'm pro-Ukrainian. I am. But I'm also going to be objective. I'm going to tell you what I hear, what I see from both sides. I'm not going to try to colorize it because, to tell you the truth, whether you're Ukrainian, whether you're British, Russian, whatever, facts are facts. And I really do believe we all benefit from that. Now, if we talk about what I was worried about, we're going to start out kind of in the north and go around that crescent towards the south. Now, if you remember last week, I was concerned about this buildup at Kupiansk and Svatovi, and there had been some press about this, like 100,000 Russians in that area, and they were already pushing forward. And if you saw some of the updates that I put out during this week on the Patreon site, which you could register for, remember, www.thecorners.pl, and then you hit that Patreon button and you could be one of the very few Patreon supporters. You're breaking my heart. Not everything should be for free. But anyway, if you read those updates, you would see that, suddenly the Russians pushed forward, and there was kind of a two-pronged attack, and they were pushing, we believe, towards Borova, because if they managed to cut across to Borova, then that would really cause a lot of the problems for the Ukraine supply lines, going all the way down towards, even maybe all the way down towards Bakhmut. Now, at the time, there was a push very hard west of Karmazanivka. There was fighting in Nadia, and it looked like very possibly the Ukrainians had lost that. There was also, Sarivka, Novahorivka. It looks right now, from what we see right now, and I can't say for sure, but it looks like this is either fizzled out or the Ukrainians managed to get reinforcements in there to stop the Russian attacks in those little towns and slow down that two-pronged attack, which eventually, because there was, if I'm just going to use my hands, there's a two-pronged attack, there's kind of a force, and then Borova is way out here, right? Now, it looks like the Ukrainians managed to stop them, or the Russian logistical supply has failed them, or it's a combination of both. This is good news for the Ukrainians because there is a big difference between the Ukrainian defenses, for example, in the north, and the Russian defenses in the south, where you've got the mines and the first line and the mines and the second line. And then the Ukrainians have not mined up their own country like that. They don't have those trenches like that. I'm not saying they don't have defensive fortifications, but it's not the same. So the risk would be that if the Russians broke through, man, yeah, there could be a problem. But it does appear that this has been slowed down or stopped, which is good news. Now, a lot of what you have been hearing, if we go a little bit further down south, a lot of what you've been hearing, and I'll show this on the map, are Ukrainian successes at Staromayeski. Now, this Staromayeski is going to be a little bit of a back and forth point, and I don't know what it's going to look like over the course of the next week. The Ukrainians it seems that they took the town. But when they took it, it was pretty much flattened. And then the Russians started really hitting back. And this may be a case where, and I think this is something that we're going to see more and more in this type of modern war, that because whether you're talking about drones or artillery or rockets or whatever, because the technological level of warfare has advanced so far that some of these targets, Bakhmut's a good example, just get obliterated. The problem is, once they're obliterated, I mean obliterated, like, there's really nothing left even to hide behind, you can't really sit in that town. So things are kind of changing, where in the past you would talk about, the different wars, World War II, World War I, World War II, or whatever, taking, Korean War, taking a town, taking a city. Obviously there are horrible, photos and films of cities that were devastated during previous wars, but now even these smaller targets, they seem to get obliterated, and you don't want to be sitting there trying to hold it while, because you've created a salient, and now suddenly what you've taken becomes a vulnerable point for artillery fire, mortars, rockets, Russian flame munitions, etc. It looks as if that there's been really a back and forth battle there, and we're not really sure what's happening. It may be that the Ukrainians are targeting Urozhnya, I hope that I'm saying that right, because if they take that might open up that whole front and cut the Russian supply lines, but we just don't know. By midweek, maybe by Wednesday, we'll have a better feel for that, and we'll have more information for that and see what's going on. Now, Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a little bit of the same. It looks like, again, like what I said last week, that the Ukrainians are having a hard time north of Bakhmut, although it depends if you're reading the Russian blog sites or the Russian press releases from like the Russian Ministry of Defense or the Ukrainian, but it does look like Ukrainians have a hard time there, and that they may have lost quite a few men and vehicles there. Although in the south of Bakhmut, things may be not so bad. There seems to be push for Andriivka, and then there's been a real tough battle at Klishtivka, although I can't say that we know exactly what's happening yet. First, it looked as if they'd taken Klishtivka, then maybe they'd entered it or taken part of it. Now that's going to be also a town to watch. But I know what you're probably waiting for, and that is down in Zaporizhia and the Robotyne battle that is going on. Now, if you saw my update midweek, and you would have seen, again, this kind of salient, this hard push, and this is where what I was referring to last week, where you really have this incredibly deep, difficult Russian defensive system. And the way that it's been explained again and again is you have mines and mines and more mines. You have mines that were laid down in a very systematic fashion. You have then booby traps. Then you have mines that were apparently just scattered. And then even when progress is made, the Russians used different forms to actually put more mines in, lob them in, drop them in, whatever. So it's just 5-6 kilometers of mines. Then you get to, say, a trench, or what may be defined as a first line, or maybe it's just a booby trap trench, and then you've got another gap, then another line, and then maybe the third line which is the real final defense, before you get to, say, the Russian artillery positions. And then there's always the risk that they're trying to build more lines behind it. Now, at Robotyne, much has been made of the fact that the Ukrainians got to the first line or crossed the first line. That may be true. But when you take a look at some of the geolocation maps, you look at Deep State UA, it looked like this salient that was there has suddenly had a chunk taken out of it, which would mean that maybe the Ukrainians have been pushed back or they pulled back. Now, why would they pull back after something that was so difficult to do? Well, again, it really may be that in these types of modern wars, until you make a breakthrough that you can just push through and see huge gains, like say what we saw previously, a year ago in Kherson, that you get in there and it's very hard to hold it, because remember, you've got everybody entrenched and they're going to localize artillery and just punish whoever has actually leapt forward. Now, we're going to see how this goes. I actually think that a critical phase, this is a critical period over the next week or two, maybe 3. We're going to see if somewhere the Ukrainians don't bust through, and if they bust through, then they're going to get into territory that doesn't have these mines, and there's debate of, what are they going to try to do, for example, in Crimea. I think I said Crimea again. Did I say Crimea? I've got a bad habit of saying Crimea, like I said in the last show. If I say Crimea instead of Crimea, it's just because in Polish, you say Krim, and Ukrainian Krim, it's always Krim, and so I've got it in my head. So if I said it again the wrong way, maybe we'll try to edit it out. But there has been some debate. What are the Ukrainians going to try to do if they manage to get through the first line, the second line, and the third line, which is going to be freaking tough? If they manage to do that, what is their goal? Is it going to go like straight for the sea? That's a long way. Probably it's for Tokmak, which you can also see on a map I'm going to put up there. If they get there, then they've actually, once again, they're hitting supply routes, and that is a huge deal. Now, on the upside here, it's clear that the Russian bloggers and the Russian side, and if you take a look at Crimea and the Russians living there, if you take a look in Russian at these things, there is panic. There is a lot of worry. And to tell you the truth, one reason why there is worry is because since 2014, you had this flood of Russians, several 100,000 moving there. Now, this is where you get into some things that are kind of up for discussion. I don't like, no matter what the war is, I don't like putting guilt of the war on just the citizenry. I just don't like doing it. I'm not saying no, that the Germans didn't know anything during World War II. Yes, I do think that they were culpable, Nazi Germany, and I do think, the internet, and even more so now because of the internet. But on the flip side, you can see how people are people and people are scared. A lot of Russians just getting out of the country, oligarchs even trying to hide their money. War is a scary thing, but you got to ask yourself questions about the hundreds of thousands that went to Crimea, because what would the promise be? Hey, go to Crimea. It's sunny, it's beautiful, it's ours again, or it's ours now, and it's cheap, whatever. It's hard for me to feel for the Russians that are there that are worried. But a sign for the Ukrainians is just how worried they are and how the blogs are worried. And everybody's thinking that, hey, this stuff is going to fail, and suddenly Ukraine's going to blast into Crimea and life will change dramatically. And again, you got to ask yourself, I don't know, why does Russia want Crimea? Why is Russia even prosecuting this war? And why does it want Crimea now, where you've got water problems, you got mine problems in part of the country, you got all kinds of problems? Just amazing when you think about it. But last subject, when it comes to the Ukrainian war update, one thing that has been going on simultaneously with this counteroffensive have been, let's say, call them the naysayers. Now, I don't want to call somebody who's just, let's say, a war analyst who says, look, the Ukrainians are going to have a hard time because they don't have air superiority. They don't have enough demining. They don't have enough vehicles, demining vehicles. They don't have the plows. And I've said all that. I'm very worried. This is costing a lot in terms of Ukrainian troops, vehicles, Allied supplied vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. But what is actually upsetting is when you see, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get sued or whatever. I'll probably say something stupid. But when you see, say, American, U.S. Experts or German experts or a certain German political party, which is very far right, that is clearly beyond pessimistic and anti-Ukraine. Because you know what? When it comes to those guys, let's ask yourself a question. What would you have Zelensky do? What would you have the Ukrainians do? Just hand it over? Because look, I mean, for Ukraine, they were just sitting there. Even if you wanted to say they never should have gotten so close to NATO, there is no argument. There's no one that can actually rationally form an argument that Ukraine was going to invade Russia, that one day they were just going to decide to invade Russia or Belarus or whatever. That is insane. And we have seen the population targeted, hit again and again and again. Again, read this story by Patrick Patterson. He's not Ukrainian, but he lived there, he went through this period in May, which he said was one of the worst periods in Kiev. And just read that. Now, so what would you have them do? But I tell you what the Allies could have done. And when I say the Allies, NATO or the West and Germany and all that, well, you know, if Biden really wanted to have done something, he could have been brave and said no fly zone. Instead of, yeah, some F-16s, maybe eventually, maybe at the end of the year, maybe next year. If the Germans actually wanted to do something, the German government, they could have said, yeah, not only we're going to promise these leopards, but we're going to get them to you in a timely fashion. If the British have actually been pretty supportive, except I can't say that I like the comments, well, the Ukrainians should be really grateful. Because you know why? Because this slow drip feed, there's two things that it proves. Well, two things that we know are proven. First of all, if you drip feed any kind of war, you never win. The U.S. is great at that, drip feeding a war and not winning, right? We've done that again and again. I'm going to have all these guys, Americans, call me up and blast me now, but let's be honest, right? Even the Republicans, take a look at what did you think about happening in Afghanistan. If you're not committed to it, you don't need to be there, right? If you drip feed to the Ukrainians, you're not helping them at nearly as much as maybe the politicians are saying, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is when you have, say, guys that are clearly not on Ukraine's side, and I'm talking about Viktor Orban, who's the Prime Minister of Hungary, saying this thing that you hear again, that the West is going to fight Russia until the last Ukrainian soldier. Well, that offends me and it pisses me off, and it certainly pisses off Poles. It ticks off Poles who are sitting here who took in Ukrainians, and Poles who understand just exactly what the threat is. But the fact is, when you drip feed in this fashion, de facto, you're doing just what Orban said. And to tell you the truth, it's pathetic. It's actually offensive, and it makes me sick to see, because these Ukrainian men, when you see what is going on, when you see how they're attacking the lines, and you know what it looks like? If you haven't watched the videos, you'll see like Bradleys or troop carriers rushing right up to the line, get the men jumping out, and the Bradley trying to turn around and come back, or whatever vehicle is trying to get to the line, and it looks like D-Day with amphibious vehicles during the invasion of Normandy, only it's on the land. The problem is they zip in there, they try to get in there, get these guys out, and then they get hit. And then they go back in. This is just insanely, insanely brave. And to tell you the truth, to think if that's what we're doing, if we're just drip feeding these people and filling them with false hope, then this is just a gargantuan cumulative sin, which makes me ashamed. Now, on to point three. Thing three. Now, the third thing. Okay, the third thing, what we're going to talk about, you may think, well, this is kind of a switch, but it happens to do with child custody battles and kind of matrimonial, husband-wife divorces and all that kind of thing. And you know why? And you think, well, what does this have to do with things? Well, it's going to go back to Belarus. But you know what? Before we talk about the third thing, let's talk very quickly about Belarus, because I forgot about this, Evgeny. But we don't have a teleprompter. We don't have it. If you guys would sign up on Patreon and support this channel and support YouTube and get us to at least 1,000 subscribers fast, so we can get some money, we'll get a teleprompter, and I won't have to have all this in my head all the time. It's difficult having so many voices in your head. But anyway, Belarus. There was a comment and a question, and in fact, one of the writers, one of the guys that actually wrote in the corners in the magazine, David McQuaid, he's written for Dow Jones. I think he was at Bloomberg. Very experienced guy. And when I brought up the Wagners in Belarus And a lot of people are like, the Vikings in Belarus, Suwałki Gap, they're going to invade, right? And I did allude to there's a twinge that's making me worry these guys are going to cause trouble. And I had one of these kind of arguments that you have, not a mean-spirited thing. I talked with Dave, and he made some very good points, as have a couple other people. Look, man, the Wagners, they're not going to invade Poland. What are you, nuts? There's no way they would do it. NATO's watching, Poland's watching, the Polish military is stacked there. It's not going to happen. And, fair point. I agree. I actually don't disagree. What I do think they could do is cause some trouble. And actually, I'm going to put another link. If you can read Polish, maybe you can't read Polish. Some of you Ukrainian fans, you probably can read Polish. But they kind of pointed out something that I'm a little bit worried, that you could have raids or just guys trying to cause trouble, hitting the border. Now, we already know Lukashenko in the past, he tried to steer all these refugees towards the Polish border. A lot of them got into Poland, and then they were stuck in a no man's land. That became a very difficult situation. Didn't make Poland look good. It certainly, the Belarus, look, this is just criminal what they were doing. But there could be these attempts. And you got to also think about how these mercenaries, I mean, look, these are these same crazy guys that decided, hey, yeah, let's go and we're going to take Moscow. You never know what these guys will do. And if you say, hey, look, I tell you what, I'll offer you each $50,000, maybe not that much, $10,000, go and cause some trouble, try to shoot up a sentry site or something like that. I'm afraid some of these guys might do it. And it's just the kind of thing that will cause trouble. That's what I'm worried about. Okay, but now let's get into the third thing. And the third thing talks about, what I'm going to talk about when we talk about the third thing, you're waiting for it, aren't you? Is again, these husband-wife divorce disputes and child custody. And I want you to remember one thing, and that is one thing in the third thing. Possession is 99% of the law. Okay. Now, why am I saying this? I'll tell you why. Well, as I told you at the beginning of the show, I'm a licensed detective in Poland. I've done all kinds of different cases. And although we don't try to specialize in the child custody matrimonial stuff, because it's more, we work for companies, pre-transaction due diligence, that type of stuff. Yeah, of course, this kind of thing comes up. And again, you get a situation. A lot of times it's actually the dad. The dad comes to us and says, look, the mom has the kid. I don't think she's a good mother. I'm not trying to judge. I'm not saying that mom should have the kid or dad should, but I'm just saying a lot of times the dads come, and I'll tell you why in a minute. They say, I don't think that she's a good mother. What can I do? And in one case, a few years ago, I remember there was like a Hollywood type, like a kind of a movie star type, and he had a Czech girlfriend, and they were in California, I think it was California, and she said she wants to take the kid back to the Czech Republic for like a vacation. He said, okay, and so she flew back, and then she wouldn't come back to the States, and he was like, hey man, I want to see my kid, I want my kid back. And then she said she's leaving, whatever, and he's like, well, she didn't have the right to do that. Okay, here is how that works for you guys to understand, and in a minute you'll understand what I'm getting at with Belarus. The way that works goes back to what I said. Possession is 99% of the law, and that is the same with children in one of these cases. And you say, well, what are you talking about? A child is not a thing. Well, no, a child is not a thing, but you got to look at things the way the judge looks at it. The judge will look at a child custody case and try to do the best for the child. Now, sure, there are some kind of slanted, if you ask me, lawyer, I'm not talking about bribery, but one day in a different, actually maybe next week, I'll do the second half of the child custody thing and how some of these cases get to be very bent out of shape. Let's not get into that now. I'm just going to tell you how it works from the side of the law. The judge is going to look at the child, and usually, unless there is some sort of evidence that the child is being abused or the mom or whoever is the caretaker is negligent, the judge probably is going to say, you know what, for now, during this divorce, we're going to leave the child with the parent that he's already with, right? Because it's stability. We don't want to move the child back and forth. We want the child at least to try to have as little stress and to suffer as little as possible during this case as we can. which is logical. Sounds great. The problem is this. The problem is that a lot of times if the mom has the kid and takes the kid somewhere, or just won't give the dad, won't let the dad visit the child, the judge still doesn't want to take the child and jerk the child away from the mom and give it to the dad, because then you get into a back and forth, and you know what can happen is that you can wind up where the kid is put in like temporary custody of a curator. Nobody wants that. So things get very ugly very fast. Now, what happens when you get a child custody fight and it's a cross-border issue? For example, like this one I mentioned with this guy and he had the Czech girlfriend. Well, here's the first thing that you need to know. The first thing is that a parent can't decide to take a child across the border to another country without the knowledge and the will of the other half, right? So typically what happens, like if you wanted to take your kid to the US and just on a trip with you and maybe mom can't go, then yeah, you need to have ready, they might not even check, but you need to have ready a signed note and fill out that form to say, yes, I agree, I know the kid's going, blah, blah, blah. And they're not always going to check, but that's what I would suggest to do. If we can get into maybe on the blog, I'll put exactly what you should do and how you should prepare for that, whatever. But if you don't have that expressed will granted, you actually don't have the right to just take the kid and go across the border, okay? But here's the problem. Once the kid is across the border, and let's say that I'm here and my kid's in a different country with the mom, it's going to be very difficult for me to get custody of my child. In fact, usually what I would say is the detective said, look, if you're going to want to see your kid, you're going to want to have custody. You're going to have to go to that country, get your paperwork sorted, live there, start working there, because one thing, these types of cases, they never end quickly, almost never. They go on forever. You're going to have to show that you can live there and you could support the kid and you should have the right to see him. If you think you're just going to do this by mail, even through your high-priced lawyer, and that judge sitting in another country, I don't care if you're talking about Czech Republic, Slovakia, whatever, the judge is going to say, yeah, you're right. I'm putting the kid on a plane and sending him back to you, who he doesn't know, who he doesn't see the commitment from, who's not living there. The judge might speak only one language, doesn't even really know, maybe just read the newspapers, hey man, California's crazy, San Francisco is a mess, who knows, right? It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. If you think it is, or if your lawyer told you it's going to happen like that, well, find another lawyer. Now, let's take this one step further. We're going to circle back to Belarus and this whole Ukrainian situation. One of the stories that came out a week or two ago, and this was all over the news, was that, and I'm going to say this guy's name, Dmitry tough name. Dmitry Shautso, the head of the Belarusian branch of the Red Cross, came out in an interview with the state TV in Belarus, and he basically admitted or confirmed that they were taking Ukrainian children to Belarus for rehabilitation. Okay, and there's a few layers to get in here when we talk about this. First of all, there could be good intentions here. Let's just say, let's forget Lukashenko. Let's just say Red Cross. Red Cross usually does good things, whatever. Let's say there could be good intentions here. Why? Well, because there are war zones. There are kids that can't find their parents. Maybe their parents have been killed. Their grandparents been killed. They're orphans, or the parents that are living can't take care of them. The kids are there. What are you going to do? There's a war. You can't get back and forth across the lines. I get it. I get it. And they want to take care of these kids. The problem is that we've seen children transported from Ukraine to Russian-controlled Crimea, to Russia. Now we have this to Belarus. The issue here is that once you transport children across the lines of another country, even if it's Russia to Belarus, I guarantee you that the law is going to be the same. That, first of all, you don't have the express will of both parents. If they're both living, you shouldn't be doing it. The reason is, once you take them across to another country, you're back in this situation that I just told you about. It's going to be very difficult for the other half to argue the case that, no, the child should be with me back in another country. So let's say that suddenly, pop, a miracle happened and there was peace in Ukraine. Putin changed his mind, everybody loves each other, there would still be, from a judicial standpoint, this horrible, difficult barrier for Ukrainian parents that are trying to get their kid back simply because you've got a judge in another country who's going to be familiar with what is happening in that country. For example, well, this kid's in the orphanage or it's foster care. The foster parents come in, hey, we're taking care of this kid. We're doing the best we can. The kid likes us. The kid's safe. And now the judge is going, well, I've got this argument coming from someone else who maybe doesn't even have much money, who can't come to visit. I don't really know them. I don't really know what it looks like in another country. Do you see where I'm going? This what has happened, whether or not there were good intentions here, and I'm just going to pretend that it's all good intentions and Lukashenko had nothing to do with it, no one was pressured. This creates a mess. And to tell you the truth, to be honest, here is where I would say there is something wrong. I do not believe that the head of any branch of the Red Cross anywhere doesn't know this. And that's also Dmitry shouts. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe it's just ignorance. I don't know. But that is wrong and it shouldn't happen. And the other Red Cross organizations said the same thing. And I find this abominable. And I hope you do too. And I hope Lukashenko does too. Freaking thug. Anyway, thanks a lot. That's the end of the 3 things. Next week, I'll give you a little bit of what's in store, hopefully next week. I want to talk about some of the organizations that are actually trying to do things and provide aid. There's different various ones. I might get in next week or the week following a guy that's also featured in the magazine. His name is Henryk Podsiadły. He's the head of the Christian Joy Foundation, which is out of Radosh, Poland. Yes, I have been involved with them, although I don't work for them, but I have tried to help them raise money, etc. I think it's a great cause. I've had a look at them. I've seen on the ground how things look, what happens. But there are other organizations too. And we're going to talk about some of the things that come up with these organizations when they try to get funds through social media and they find out that social media doesn't want to help them. So that's one. I'm giving you a clue into one of the 3 things that are going to happen next week. And we may come back a little bit to this detective matrimonial stuff because that actually you get into surveillance, what really happens, what's going to work, what's not going to work. That's the detective stuff. Maybe you'll find it intriguing as true crime and unadulterated violence. I don't know, but that comes down to your mind, whether or not it's sick or healthy or like my own, which you can probably guess what that's like. Otherwise, over and out. See you soon. Cześć, do widzenia. And you guys hang in there in Ukraine. We're with you.